10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining me. This is Michael Voss with the No Soundbites Allowed podcast, and we have a great episode here today. First of all, let me start off, though. I want to say that I appreciate and thank everyone for being here with us. We always appreciate you. We thank you for being here. You guys make it all worthwhile. Now, with that said, I do also want to introduce my very special guest in today is Assemblyman Clifford Crouch. Mr. Crouch, we've spoken before, and I enjoy your conversation. I'm so happy to be here with you again. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much.
All right. Now, we have a lot of things that we would want to go over and discuss with you today. There's a lot that's been going on since the state of the state. And so we appreciate the time that you're able to give us. And I know we just came back from the Broome County Chamber of Commerce meeting, so we'll address a little bit of that. But let me first start off with one, congratulations on the election win.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
So far.
And then let me also go into let's start with the state of the state, because there was Governor Cuomo gave a very progressive 2020 presidential run speech, which was very targeted to the audience, which was exclusive of upstate New York.
That's right.
And there were many people who noted and identified that, but one of those people in particular was yourself. Can you tell me, what did you think about that?
Well, in general, he proposed a tremendous amount of spending. And a lot of it's targeted for, we know it's targeted for the MTA in New York City. And I didn't hear a lot of dollars coming back up to upstate because of our roads and bridges. They certainly need repair, and especially if you look at this winter so far, the potholes are increasing, and it's inevitable. But we need constant funding to combat that. And it's tough on the local rural municipalities to keep their roads in good shape so they're safe to travel on without some assistance from the state. And it looks like he wants to cut some of the CHIPS funding, which is Consolidated Highway Improvement Program. And that's a serious program. It's so necessary for the towns, villages, the counties, cities, all get some type of CHIPS funding. And he seems to want to cut that back. And at the same time, he is looking to cut the AM funding, which is aid to municipalities. And in some cases, like one town of Dickinson, it might only be $7,000 or $8,000, but to town of Union, it's I think $300 and some odd thousand. That's a major cut out of their budget. And the governor is always talking about consolidation of government and entities and so forth. And I've heard him say, well, we want to be very careful about how we push the cost down to municipalities. You cut the funding that the state typically has offered, you're pushing the cost down to the municipalities because, the miles of road have not changed. The bridges numbers have not changed. They all need to be repaired. And so it's a farce if he's saying we don't want to push the cost down to municipalities. And yet this is exactly what he's doing. And by the way, the 2% cap is permanent. I made comments with him when he first introduced that 2% cap. Our minority conference had a breakfast meeting with the governor. And he announced that he was going to do a 2% cap on all school districts and municipalities. And he explained it, and my hand was the first in the air. I said, Governor, if you're going to do that, if you're going to restrict the income possibilities for schools and municipalities, you've got to give them some mandate relief. We all know that what the state tells these municipalities and school districts that they have to do are their mandates, but there typically is no funding to offset that cost. So I made my statement. He said, well, we're going to do the mandates later. And I said, Governor, all due respect, we need to do the mandates as part of this package so the schools and municipalities know what they're dealing with and help them run their operation more efficiently with the money that they are able to collect. Well, we're going to do the mandates later, which we have not done.
No.
There's been no real mandate relief for the counties. the school districts or anything like that, a little bit of mandate relief, if you will. I'll give credit where credit's due, but there's been some accepting of the cost or the increase in cost of Medicaid to the counties. That's sort of been offset. But the cost to the counties for Medicaid is still out there. It's about 20, 25 cents on a dollar, depending on what program. And so these counties still have to lay a tax burden on the property owners in order to cover that Medicaid cost. And I've been a strong proponent over the years of the state picking up the total Medicaid cost. It happens in just about probably 48 other states where the state picks up all the Medicaid cost. But if the state would do that, if New York State would do that for our counties, we could potentially lower the property tax in every county by 25%. And that's real dollars. That's real dollars that businesses don't have to pay, homeowners don't have to pay. I mean, seniors, you want to talk about giving breaks to seniors and businesses, that would be real dollars still in their pocket that they could spend back into the economy.
No, those would be huge incentives, especially since, and I was speaking with you about this, and I know it's also something that came up at the Chamber of Commerce meeting. Somewhere, the estimate, I believe, is about 800 businesses have left the southern tier of New York over the last roughly 8 years. Assuming that each of these small businesses only had 10 people working, which is inaccurate, we're looking at 8,000 people not losing an opportunity to work or to grow a business. And that's devastating because that's mostly the middle class. So anything that could spur growth of creation of jobs or to allow the small businesses that have remained to expand is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at, I think I've read where 1 million people have left upstate New York.
1.3 million so far.
Exactly. Those are people that are no longer here working, spending money down at Price Chopper or Wegmans or their local furniture store or anything like that. Those people are gone. And we have about 4,000 to 5,000 jobs that are currently open in the southern tier. And the issue is getting the person with the right skills for these jobs. And I've been working with the Department of Labor because I'm being told out in the field that they need to change up on how we can access money for job training and workforce development. And Department of Labor at this point in time has not met with me. They've promised a couple of meetings, but we have not been able to meet at this point in time. Getting the right skills so that a person can have, if they're working currently, but maybe there's a better job, they want to move up the ladder. That's increasing their income that they can spend in the economy. And so here we are, 4,000 to 5,000 jobs in our hands, that trying to find people to fill those jobs with the right skills. And that's a difficult task. Been working with some of the schools, and I know DCM of BOCES, that's Delaware, Madison, Chenango, Otsego. They have 16 schools in the district. Working with Perry Dewey, who's a superintendent of BOCES, they're initiating a new program. It's career pathways, basically. And it's eventually, when it's fully implemented, they're going to start talking to the early grade school individuals so they understand what's in the community. I mean, when you and I were young, it was firemen, policemen. Those were the job opportunities.
That was the target.
That's right. And you started thinking about that a lot of times when you were young.
Yeah.
Now, the other side of that coin is that there's seniors, juniors and seniors in high school have no clue what they're going to do. They may not be looking at college for a variety of reasons, but they have no clue what's available out in the workforce.
What's that goal down the line?
Exactly. Skills, trade, plumber, electrician, or whatever. A lot of these individuals don't even understand how to turn a screwdriver or use a wrench because they've never had to do that in their life growing up. And yet they don't know what opportunities might be out there that they could enjoy. So they're looking at trying to develop mentoring programs and apprenticeships with all the local businesses. It's a great opportunity for some of the local businesses that have difficulty hiring. If you could look at somebody in 10th grade right now as a sophomore and bring them in on a mentorship and show them what you've got in your shop that they could potentially do, and then we could go back to the school and set up the education program so it's fine-tuned for that individual to have the career skills when they graduate from school. Now, this is going to be a kind of a long process. And I was at a meeting last night, and somebody said, well, it should have been done 10 years ago.
Well,
exactly.
Yes.
You know? Well, who knew? So,
well, actually, I can tell you, and I'm glad you're bringing it up, because apprenticeship is one of the most critical things going on. I know that we are already in the beginning of a vortex, for lack of a better word, a downward spiral of the need for plumbers, artisans, like carpenters and electricians. We do not, machinists.
Sure.
We do not have enough, and because we've made this push towards degrees in technology, so every kid knows how to run an app. They don't know how, as you said, they don't know how to turn a screw with a screwdriver. But the thing we need for our infrastructure, for the business creation, and just to maintain what we have, are those kids with those turning the screw
that's right.
capabilities.
You know, having the workforce to support the businesses. I mean, they've got, like I say, a lot of open jobs, but having the workforce to support them is one side of the coin. But if you look at the other side of the coin from the business side, having to deal with workers' comp costs, that issue came up this morning. We've got some of the highest workers' comp costs in the nation, and we pay the least amount of benefits. And so we need to look at how other states handle that. They have less workers' comp costs, and the individual that's injured quite often is getting a better benefit in that state. Somehow in the middle, in that pipeline, there's money being pulled off for too much administration or too much this or that. We need to look at that and have some real workers' comp reform. And the regulations that are imposed on our businesses, and whether it's a friendly atmosphere with a regulatory agency like DEC or Department of Labor or whatever, those things all have to come together in a package that the businesses don't feel like they're the bad guy all the time and in danger of going to jail or massive fines. 2 years ago, I walked into a business. When I go into a community for whatever reason, I have an appointment with somebody, if I've got extra time, I'll oftentimes just walk into the local hardware store or some other business that's there that I'm somewhat familiar with, especially. I walked into this business, and the guy looked at me and said, "Cliff, I'm glad you're here, because you're the first one I'm going to tell. If I can solve this place, I'm out of New York State. I am sick of the regulations." And he was running a business that basically had no environmental damage because there was no chemicals involved or anything like that. It was basically just a waste product that typically would be crushed and recycled. Okay. And so, but yet he was always beleaguered by Department of Labor, OSHA, whatever. He had, I'm going to say, 4 or 5 people working for him. But I went by that business about 6 months ago, and it's gone. He's closed.
See, and that's my example. Yeah. Like I was saying, 800 businesses, that one's 5, but I'm sure there's another one that would have 15.
Exactly.
And it's because we've created this environment in New York State that I believe in the state of the state, as you had addressed it, and many did, is continuing this business unfriendliness model in the pursuit of the 2020 presidential race and becoming the progressive capital of the nation that no one in New York asked for. That is driving business out. I mean, we've got to turn that around if we want to be viable.
Sure.
And it's a very big concern.
We've got to make an atmosphere that's conducive for people to want to move into New York State. Now, when Lockheed Martin was expanding jobs a few years ago, they were getting people moving in, but they were building houses in Pennsylvania. Yeah. Not New York, because of the tax burden here. Yeah. And that didn't do us any good, because we paid them here, they took the money, went to Pennsylvania and spent it.
A lot of people are doing that.
Yeah.
And how can you blame them when, as another thing, talk a little bit about minimum wage, which also came up at the meeting today with the Chamber of Commerce. And one businessman highlighted, it's why are businesses here in New York when the subway in downtown Binghamton costs $12 for a meal? You go to Montrose in PA, it costs $8. Right. The worker in New York is going to cost $15 or more, because the minimum wage is again being looked to be raised, unless, and please do correct me if I'm missing that, but it's looking to be raised again for all of New York State. And that's not the case in PA. When you start doing that kind of math, people are being hurt because the costs are going up. Businesses are hurt because the cost of the employee and the goods are going up. Taxes are going up. Is the governor hearing that very simple equation and saying, Mr. Governor, we've got to lower or reduce the burden.
Right.
Otherwise, this isn't going to work for anyone.
No, when he initially introduced the minimum wage, it was going to be $15 all across New York. And our legislative colleagues, they fought hard to have a separate wage for upstate.
Right, $12.75.
Well, it slowly is moving up to $12. But my understanding, they'll analyze the impact this year probably and decide whether it's going to go on up to 15. And that's a little scary. I know of 3 restaurants in the last year that went out of business. And what they said was the minimum wage is killing us.
Yeah.
And it's not the wait staff necessarily at that point in time, but it's the salad maker, the janitor, even the chef. There's sometimes entry level positions as the chef, and to have that jack all up, and they might have been a marginal restaurant before, maybe not, but to have that increase in cost, and you've got to start increasing your meal prices to the point where you start getting some rejection.
Right.
I've always been a proponent of let the economy determine the minimum wage, and a lot of people will poo-poo that, but my son went to Columbus, Ohio to go to college in 1996.
Right.
And our economy here was struggling. And but Columbus was booming. And he had given up he didn't have a summer job.
Right.
So he got accepted at college, and he went to Columbus to see living arrangements and stuff. And he came back and he said, I don't have a summer job, but I can get one out there. So he literally moved to Columbus, Ohio in July of 96. And within 2 days, he's got 2 jobs. One was at the night auditor out at the Holiday Inn South, which was because of his computer skills that he'd gotten in our great school system. The other one was just a 4-hour, 5-hour in the afternoon salesman's job.
Right.
At Tom McCann's store, because he's a workaholic, number one. But
always a good trait.
And he's, he'd go to work at 10 o'clock until 6 in the morning at the Holiday Inn. And so that was his summer working. But he said Burger King in 1996, it had a sign in the window, help wanted, $8.50 an hour to start.
Right.
Now look at this.
Above minimum wage.
Way above minimum wage at that point in time.
Yeah.
In 96, $8.50 an hour. They had to pay that because of the economy. Everybody had to pay because of the economy. So, if you've got a robust economy, people can go down and get that burger. And that person's going to get $8.50 an hour because you've got a job where you're making good money. Okay. And so the economy typically will drive the wages, if you will. Certainly was the case in Columbus because that, typically that's a minimum wage entry level job. And yet here it was probably 30-40% above minimum wage. So even the McDonald's and their reaction, and a lot of the fast food places, they're putting in kiosks.
Right.
So there's less people.
Which are automated or smaller.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so there's a number of people now that we have put out of work at the fast food. We didn't help them at all.
No,
the goal was to help them make more money.
But it's cheaper to have an automated machine and half the staff.
Sure.
And from a pure business aspect, no one goes into business to lose money.
That's right.
So you can't blame someone for owning a business and wanting a profit.
Sure.
And the answer is to be able to maintain that and to keep up with the burden that's being put on by Governor Cuomo and a single party mandate for the state. That you can't have as many workers. You just can't. So I do see that. And I hope he can appreciate, and I think the veil of a 2020 presidential race where he's most directly in competition with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, who in my opinion, and you don't have to comment on this, I personally believe she lied to her constituent, half the state. She lied to us, said she would do her 6-year term, and immediately have turned around and said, I'm running 2020. That's just my personal thought. I threw that in there. But I think that when you look at her in competition with the hopes of Governor Cuomo, and when we have an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez screaming at the top of her lungs, go left, I think that's really putting a pressure on us. So I hope when you have spoken to the governor, is he receptive to the things you're saying about upstate New York from you and your colleagues?
I haven't had an opportunity to speak to him in the last 2 to 3 years personally, but I get the idea in talking to some of the staff, background staff, is that I hear you, but it ain't going to happen. You know, he's on an agenda, and he's going to cater to the environmental side. He's going to cater to the liberal, way liberal left, and he's trying to get further left than Cynthia Nixon this last year with the primary.
Yes.
And so that's the danger, because, you know, upstate New York is not the far left.
No, not at all.
And you should recognize that. About half the population is in Long Island and upstate New York. You've got 9 million in the city. That it's a different world where they're living. They have a lot of issues there, housing issues and so forth, that they just don't seem to ever get addressed, homelessness and so forth. But yet, we run a pretty tight ship upstate.
For the most part, yeah.
We have our issues of homeless and so forth, housing issues, but not to the level that they have in the city. So let the city be the city, let upstate be upstate. And there's been a lot of talk about having
the split,
separation there. And, you know, we sort of did that with a minimum wage. We decided, okay, upstate's a whole different economy. And that was a good thing, because I've looked at the Rockefeller Institute study of dividing upstate and downstate. And they determined that there's more money from upstate more money from the city came to upstate than what money went from upstate to the city.
How old is that report?
I want to say maybe, I'm guessing 5, 6, 7 years maybe.
Okay.
But, okay, if that's right, that's right. And I can understand, because, you know, Wall Street area, 10 block area is 25% of our state's income tax revenue. Right. So, but on the other hand, as I glanced through that study, I didn't read the whole thing word for word. There was no compilation there of what's the cost of doing business upstate with the regulations that we have to live under that were specifically designed for downstate.
Yeah, if you were to change that regulation structure.
Yeah, there's no factory there.
Yeah.
This is maybe not a good example, but a number of years ago, there was 4 firemen that lost their lives on the 4th, 5th, 6th floor of some apartment building down in New York City.
Yes.
The legislative knee-jerk reaction was that to mandate that all fire department, all interior firefighters had to have repelling gear that they carried in with them.
Which is useless in upstate for the most part.
Well, we have 2-story buildings for the most part. Now, the morning that we were going to vote on that, suddenly there was an amendment to that legislation that exempted a city over 1 million people.
Which is not most of upstate.
It's New York City.
Yeah.
And the legislation was designed and written because of the issue in New York City. And yet all of our volunteer fire departments across the state and paid fire departments had to spend money to get this special repelling gear. It had to be fireproof and all this stuff. And it didn't come at a cost of $150. If I remember right, it was like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 per unit. So,
of course, the government's paying for it. It's going to be top dollar.
Well, that's the requirement. It's not that, the companies put this out there, but they have a limited market, so they've got to charge a certain amount.
I'm not blaming the business for charging the government more. I'm upset that the government is mandating without thought this equipment that essentially is a waste of taxpayer dollars, because it's functionally, I mean, if you want to say, okay, make sure there's a certain number, not one for every fireman, but, one in every other fire station.
Well, any of the interior firefighters had to have repelling gear. So if you had 3 people going into the building, they had to have 3 pieces of repelling gear.
So you need one essentially for every fireman.
And again, that's a cost that was imposed on all of our rural fire departments, which they derive their income from local property tax people.
Right.
So they had to spend, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 on repelling gear It was mandated because of an issue in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a quick indication of what we have to live under to be in upstate New York. And it's regulations that are designed for the city that cost us money one way or the other.
It's insane. And I can understand the burden you're under. I know we started a little late, and so we're running a little bit behind, but I do want to ask two things. So one, looking at the vote on DACA, mm-hmm. which recently just came through the school, the New York Dream Act. Right. That just came out, and it seems we're going to be, upstate will be spending money, and all of New York, but specifically upstate New York will be spending money on roughly 30,000 undocumented, or in other words, illegal aliens, so that they can go to school free. Mm-hmm. And as we were just talking about the training of many of our students to retain them here in the state, it strikes me as aggravating, and for many property owners, taxpayers here in New York State, that we're going to be spending millions, tens of millions of dollars for 30,000 people mm-hmm. who are basically receiving a reward for actively and consistently breaking the law versus our actual citizen residents. What was your thought on the vote and your vote itself?
Well, I've never supported that. And it's an issue of, even if you look at it from the standpoint of there's every college, when they accept applications, has a certain number of seats that are available. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I just ask people, what would you think if your son or daughter didn't get a chance to go to, I'll use Binghamton University, didn't get a chance to go to Binghamton University as they wanted because all the seats are filled.
Right.
But then you realize that maybe 50 of those seats were taken by undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
And I understand the plight of young kids being brought here without any, they had no part in it. Their parents came and so forth.
Right. There's compassion. You have compassion.
Exactly. But yet, where's New York State and the governor been in trying to make sure that we could provide a path to citizenship for these individuals who are actually, a lot of them are working and paying mm-hmm. taxes and so forth. But yet, it gets back to, it's a law, federal law,
yeah,
that many states and cities are choosing to ignore and not allow immigration officials to access somebody. And we've already seen some, bad things happening
when that is done.
And that's another story. But yet, we've got a lot of, and I'll say it, good people, mm-hmm. that unfortunately are outside of the law through no fault of their own. But
sure.
Yet, we've got honest tax-paying people that live here, they're citizens, and I just had a conversation with a lady the other day that she came here and got her citizenship. She paid her way through college, and she's saying, "What are you trying to do here in New York? I paid my way. I became a citizen. I did it right. And now you're saying to all these other people, well, we're going to give you free college." It just does not sit right with my constituents.
It doesn't sit right with a lot of people I know, both who have legally immigrated into New York State mm-hmm. and those of us who are actual citizens by birth, natural citizens. I don't know that the governor and the progressives understand. Maybe it's because I'm an upstate and I'm originally from the city. Mm-hmm. I'm from the Bronx originally. But
we won't hold that against you.
But still, it's infuriating to know that here in the community in Broome County, in Delaware County, in our areas, that we're meeting up with people who say, I can't afford this.
Exactly.
And yet I'm looking at the governor saying, and look, we're giving this other person something free. Mm-hmm. It just seems to be spitting in people's faces, which again leads to people leaving.
And potentially denied a seat at the college of your choice.
Yeah.
Because of that program.
Yeah.
Because they can only accept X number of people.
Yeah, it's aggravating. And I don't think they appreciate that. So thank you for letting us know why and your thoughts on that legislation. The final thing I'd ask about And I do appreciate and thank you for the time that you've been able to give us here today. Next week, it is planned that gun legislation is going to be coming out, that we're going to see a slew of this. Now, I've been talking about this a lot recently. As is, I think, well known by most people, I am an advocate of the Second Amendment. I am very much against restrictive or regressive gun control legislation. Not gun control, but regressive gun control. At the moment, on the slate that I am aware of, are a bill to remove, to prevent children to go to gun shows, which has nothing to do with public safety. There is a bill out there to limit the amount of ammunition someone can buy, which does nothing to protect public safety. There is the password bill, the social media password bill, got a lot of coverage in November and December. I helped break that, which does nothing to protect anyone. And then there is the red flag legislation, which again does nothing and has been proven in 7 states over 10 years to not protect anyone. Those are only 4 bills, and I did an article about this comparing it to the Islamberg bombing threat. Could any of those bills I've just mentioned, or any of the ones that you may be aware of, none of them, as I can understand, would have prevented either the threat or, God forbid, a terrorist action. What hope do we have?
Well, I'm going to be very honest. It's scary at this point in time for any person that happens to enjoy firearms for whatever reason, hunting, shooting, sports, or whatever. And it's going to be a little scary at the, coming up, because the majority in both houses are now run by Democrats that are basically from the city, and they just don't understand our culture up here.
Sure.
The history of father taking his son out hunting and so forth, making it more and more difficult to enjoy that, and imposing regulations that are very restrictive on the honest, law-abiding citizen that happens to own a firearm. I've opposed a lot of this legislation. I happen to be a licensed to carry person myself. I've enjoyed hunting over the years. I don't get a chance to hunt really anymore. And so, but I appreciate, number one, the sport, but I appreciate the family ties and so forth.
Self-defense is a factor.
Self-defense. A lot of people poo-poo that, but every once in a while you'll see something in the paper where it was just something last week where a guy,
a good Samaritan, had a gun and ended a situation. Yes.
And I'm not saying that that's always going to be the case, but when you take a very idealistic view that we ought to get rid of all guns and make it so the average person maybe couldn't own one or whatever, stupid things like limitations on buying ammunition. There are a number of people in upstate New York that actively participate in shooting events. Yeah. And so in their
competitions and
in their practice, they may shoot up 1,000 rounds of ammunition in a weekend.
Right.
But they travel around and go to these shooting competitions and stuff. So all of a sudden now they would have to get a special permit and prove that they're an active competitor in order to buy enough ammunition to even practice.
Well, I notice in all these legislations that to get these exemptions or even to get the permits, you have to be a good person. You have to be a positive character. These vague terms that I don't know what they mean, and anyone can interpret any way they want, which basically tell me, well, we're going to say no. No matter what you do,
our current system is basically if you go to the county and you apply for a permit to own a firearm, the sheriff usually is charged with doing a background check.
Yes.
And as well as if you go to purchase that firearm, there's the federal, what they call a NICS check. It's a background check. Now, could that be, maybe the NICS check be expanded a little bit? Here in New York, we've expanded the background check to include any known mental health issues that the sheriff can find.
Which is fine.
No
one argues that.
And way back when we passed the SAFE Act, my argument on the floor was that bill was going to do nothing to prevent the Sandy Hook issue or any other massacre
or even regular gun violence.
Exactly.
And by the way, I follow the GIVE report. It's a New York, 17 metropolitan cities throughout New York, including Binghamton, is included in this. I follow it every year since the SAFE Act has come out. And in fact, the numbers are the same or higher in terms of all gun violence. SAFE Act has done nothing.
Sure, that's right. And so you look at it, my argument on the floor at that time was this bill only is so we can pat ourselves on the back when we leave this chamber and say, well, we've done something.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I said, we are not addressing the root of the problem. That's mental health issues. Oftentimes people that want to cause harm to somebody else for whatever reason. We've pulled money out of mental health in schools for a number of years, and we're now just starting to see a little bit of a turnaround to put more money back into mental health. But my comment, again, was on the floor was, we've got young people coming to school that have been sexually molested, physically abused, or verbally abused, total dysfunctional families, and having to deal with bullying in school. And we're not addressing the full problem there with mental health as we should. Mental health, we should make sure we take that stigma away and work with these kids. And you'll see the benefit of that 15 years down the road or 20 years down the road. And yet we haven't really addressed that. The whole red flag bill.
Which we have discussed in the past.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, right today, if a teacher sees a student acting out and you think, boy, this could be kind of a dangerous situation.
Questionable. Mm-hmm.
They can talk to the local law enforcement and explain what's going on. Law enforcement can do their thing. And they can go to the law enforcement, can go to a judge and recommend that, let's look to see what guns are in the house or whatever. But the governor's proposal is that the teacher would no longer have to go through law enforcement.
No, straight to the judge.
Exactly. So having law enforcement in there, these individuals are trained in many facets of looking at people, deciding their mental health issues, and that, they're not right all the time because they're not psychiatrists. But psychiatrists are not right all the time either. So, but taking that one step out of there, taking a professional person out of the equation
to evaluate that situation.
Exactly. So I think that's a real problem as far as that I've got, and I want to make sure that if an individual, let's say a student, has some issues, but they take their father's guns,
mm-hmm.
what's the process for him to be able to get that back if it's decided that there is no issue with his son?
It's vague.
Yeah, exactly.
At best in the law.
So
I'll give you two other problems with it. That actually one I've mentioned a lot, and we've seen this in Connecticut and Indiana, the two states that have had the longest time with red flag legislation. Besides the fact that it's never been proven to protect anyone from anything.
Right.
But there is, and no state actually records this, and this is important, by law in New York State, the CPS, if the red flag goes through and they are doing this action, then every child in that household must, by law, be removed from that family. So you're not only fighting to take away the stigma of this non-crime that has been punished upon you, you have to fight the state to get your kids back.
Right.
That's one problem. The other thing and I was just talking to Larry Sharp, a libertarian who had run for governor last year, and I had a recent interview with him, and he brought up another factor I didn't realize. If we pass the red flag legislation, every teacher in every school system must identify and must go through this red flag process, because if they don't, they're going to be liable to be sued, exactly. Which means the county and the cities are going to be liable for lawsuits in that chance that one kid, that one incident turns into something. They now would have to go to court constantly, which is a new cost. Mm-hmm. It's a new burden. And if they don't do it, there's now this legal liability problem. I don't think many people have addressed this. This law has not been thought through, in my opinion.
No, I would agree with that, because, we debated it on the floor. Was it last year?
Oh, it did come up.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the initial notification red flag bill was quite mild, we'll say, but the police officers were still involved, okay? But then it changed up when the rhetoric cranked up. The governor said, well, we got to have this. And so our arguments against that, which we pointed out the fact that the police is no longer involved and they're an essential component of this, but it's just trying to make sure that we want to make sure everybody's safe. But at the same time, we have an obligation to protect everybody's rights. And I said it before during the SAFE Act debate, those people that want to cause harm to somebody else will find a way, whether it's
making bombs.
And if you look at the mass shootings, most of them were already in violation of all the laws.
Yes.
You know, the shooting that was over here at ACA, my understanding, if I remember right, that individual did have a permit and was able to purchase some weapons. But then there was, I don't know if you could have gotten those weapons under today's background check.
No, most likely under today's checks, he wouldn't have been able to get it. At the time, they didn't exist.
And so we've done some good things.
Yes.
But again, if you Google up students with pipe bombs or something like that, pipe bombs are illegal.
Yeah.
And yet,
absolutely illegal.
Just the 3 kids that were arrested because they were going to attack
Islamberg. Yeah. They made pipe bombs.
Illegal pipe bombs.
Which means whether we had all these things on guns, which is part of my point, we could pass all of these legislations and it still doesn't protect anyone. So why do this unless you want to attack law-abiding citizens, which makes me go, why am I in this state? Since I love the Second Amendment and they seem to hate me for it. And I'm talking about Governor Cuomo and the progressive movement.
And some people never, especially in the city, they are never exposed to any firearm. And it scares them. I understand that. But there's some people that if they walked into a room and you were there and 3 or 4 other people that they all knew, but if there was a firearm that they could see on the shelf or the bookshelf or anything like that, they would leave because of fear of being shot. And I mean, guns don't shoot people.
No.
It's the people, you know. Somebody would have to pick up that firearm, and it's number 2, it'd have to be loaded. But they just have a fear of being in the same room.
But someone's irrational fear that they may have should not affect my life. If I have an irrational fear of, I don't know, cats or brown umbrellas, again, I'm making this extreme, but the point is, just because I have that doesn't mean that everyone else should be punished for it. But yet that's what we're seeing coming. So if I'm hearing this correctly, and you can correct me, in the coming week, it seems that both from the Senate side, and I'll be talking to State Senator Fred Akshar about this shortly, but and then the Assembly, it looks like all of these provisions that have been proposed are going to go through, even though common sense in many cases would say either they should not or there should be major modification at the very least. Right. But is it possible for the public who are listening to this right now to contact you, to contact your colleagues and change their minds on at least some of these bills? And if they can, how would they contact you? Well,
they typically can email my office or even direct calls. And I mean, I'll say it on the record, I am against this expansion of gun control. And I will be voting no on every one of those issues. Show me something, as we talked before, show me something that's really meat and potatoes on mental health issues that are going to help people, help them feel better. And, so I want people to express their opinion,
of course,
but they also need to make sure they express their opinion to some of the people that are not from this area, but will probably be supporting it.
That's why I'm trying to reach out to them.
Sure.
And also why I give some of the feedback I've received about, and do you see the consequences, both the applicability and the consequences of a lot of these bills that don't make sense. Right. But with that said, and we've covered a lot of ground here, and I do appreciate and thank you. I know we were over at the other event with the Chamber of Commerce for Broome County, so we started a little late, and I know we went a little long. I thank you, and I appreciate the time you've given me today.
Thank you very much.
You always have an open ear here and an open mic. to address any of the concerns and issues. We're always happy to have you here. But with that said, for those who are interested in any of the issues we've talked about, please, and you are in the 122nd Assembly District, please contact Clifford Crouch, my wonderful guest here in the Assembly. And otherwise, I want everyone to be well, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.